questions for us just to locate things and just kind of get used to finding it and working with it. At least there's one extra if you don't have one. But before I do, I just want to mention this. I thought about it early, and then I don't think I've actually mentioned it. One of the kind of the premier, this one is called a synopsis of the four Gospels. It's edited by Kirk Alland, and these are the guys who work on the variants or whatever in the Greek text. And a lot of these are Germans, but it's been translated into English. And there are indexes in the front, there's indexes in the back in terms of locating things. But as you go through, then it lists all the verses in columns when you're on a parallel passage. And so what's really helpful then is that rather than having to go from Matthew and flip all the way over to Mark and then flip, whatever, then all of the passages are parallel in the columns. And then obviously they're not word for word, and so if there's a blank, and again, this is what's so ironic, and I still just kind of touch my head and I think about this. To be the shortest, when it comes to narrative, Mark sometimes gives us more details than Matthew and Luke do. They condense the narrative because they're going to have the parables and the sermons and the discourses. And so a number of times when you just see parallel to parallel, Mark will even have a fuller account than the other two will, but regardless, you don't have to flip back and forth page to page. And there's a number of these, but this one's, and I wouldn't recommend if it wasn't in English, but this is one of the standard ones. And so sometime if you ever just want to check on something, where's something at, and as we've said from the very beginning, you have to make some choices about the order of things. Reading through this week, and you start in Matthew and you go whoops and you jump back. Remember we talked about that on the train? And if you're reading through on the daily life of Jesus and just start looking, without something like this, just reading through the text, we would just assume North American things will be in chronological order, or they'll be just where Matthew's going to be more thematic, and even John in a different way is going to be. So anyway, I just want to recommend that. Always keep that at hand. And down the road, if you just want to check on passages or something, glad for you to use that and have access to it. Now, which is, or where is, what is, whichever way you want to say it, and Livy, be quiet, which is the first account in the four Gospels that's in all four Gospels? Okay, help us. It's the feeding of the 5,000. Now, let me just ask a couple of questions and then let's just talk for a second. If I'm going to find the feeding of the 5,000, where would I go on the train to find that without just having to flip through page after page? The feeding of the 5,000 is a miracle. So if you turn to the back, and not the one that has the list for the memory things, but go to the back, and you'll have to turn back to the left a little bit. And it's these ones that are condensed. This one is discourses. And then here's a page everybody can see kind of what it looks like. It has a triangle with miracles on the top, circles with parables on the other side. Okay, everybody there? Now, knowing that it's a miracle and then running your eye down and looking for all four accounts, what number of the miracles is it? Pardon? 18. And if you're going to do a zip code of just the chapter from each book, the zip code would be what? Okay, same again, 14. 696. And you see how helpful that is? Because then, by turning to each chapter in the gospel, you can find it very quickly. And that's what's really, really helpful. Now, I want everybody to turn to the page, and we're just going back a little bit. I'm going to say the fall of 29 to 70 are sent out. So just turn back just a few pages, the fall Everybody know what I'm talking about? It'll be the square just above the wheel is going to be dark. Everybody find that one? Okay. Now, and I'm not doing this to just pass the time, but starting here, and notice something again very specific. The feeding of the 5,000 is the first. Yeah, and let me just stop for a second. The first time I went to, I don't know why I thought about this. I just thought, I just wonder what event in the life of Jesus is recorded in all four Gospels. If I just had my New Testament, I wouldn't live long enough to ever be able to go through line by line and figure that out. And then I thought, I'll go to the train, check and see, and then sure enough, for all the early events in the life of Jesus, the only event that's in all four Gospels is the feeding of the 5,000. Now, we've gone to the fall of 29, so we're just within a couple of months of the cross. And again, notice, and I'm about halfway down the page on the left, you start with Luke 10, and your zip code for both pages is only Luke. And this fall of 29 is not found in Matthew, it's not found in Mark, and it's not found in John. And again, that's just one of those really unique, helpful things to kind of see in terms of that. But after this, I want you to find the next event that is in all four Gospels, and you have to stay in the train to do this. So turn the page and just start checking zip codes and see where is the next event that is in all four Gospels. Jesus enters Jerusalem, and let me give it a specific name, the triumphal entry. Triumphal entry. The king comes in on the donkey. Now, just let this just kind of settle for a second. We're in the spring of the last year of Jesus' life before we come to the second event that is in all four Gospels. Everybody with me in terms of just parallel and thinking about that? And that's why just this little tool has been so helpful, because how else would you be able to, well, and again, you could work your way through this and check the columns and do this, but it would take a long, long time to go through all of the different columns and to do that. And so when you want to look and find things like that, then your listing in each of those four accounts over on the side can help you to do that. Now, is that the only one?
There's one, fall of 29's got no accounts, all zeros, just below 22 squared.
Okay.
See it?
Let me see where it is.
It says 70 return, question mark, not sure when, and it's all zeros.
Yes, and that will probably be in an earlier time, and it may have already been recorded earlier, is my guess, on what they did. And like I said, these folks will be the first to tell you there's not a date in the margin of our text, and you have to put together. Some of it is just from the best we can tell, this is where it's at. But they would also then live in things like this, because we're doing this for 8-year-old kids. We're not going to send them to an English translation done by a German. Okay, we're not going to do that. And so, but you have to make editorial choices at least to get close. And they're the first to say, study it, look at it, if it shifts a little bit, but still having the general framework is going to be really, really close, and they'd be open to any other things. But turn the page, well, let me just notice this. When you run your eye down, and I'm in the dark of the wheel, okay? So we're in the last week. The only event in that whole page is the triumphal entry. And then when you turn the page, because this is going to be, as we're going to see, 30% of the gospel account, then the discourse on Peter's overconfidence, well, let's go up one. The discussion with the disciples at the Last Supper. And what you're going to see is that as we head into literally the final 3 or 4 days of Jesus' life, time that all 4 Gospels will have more events that they all record than any other time in the Gospel account. Okay? We'll just want to make one very simple, but just you can see what we're talking about. And because you go through this whole train, the feeding of the 5,000, triumphal entry, those are easy to remember because in the Gospel of John, I'm at the feeding of the 5,000, John says, Jesus, seeing that they wanted to come and make him a king by force, made the disciples get into the boat. And our Greek teacher was an ex-Marine, and he said, when I read this, I see 1 foot on the shore, 1 foot in the boat, grabbing guys by the back of the collar and saying, because they've gone out and they've been preaching these parables about the kingdom and the seed and everything, and we've got 5,000 guys ready to go to Jerusalem to kill the Romans. We need to get the instigators away from the mob, because whether you want to be a king or not, we are going to make you a king by force. And until the triumphal entry, that is the only event that is in all 4 of our Gospels. What's the triumphal entry about? Hosanna in the highest, the coming of the king. And so do you see the imagery that is there? And so it's only those 2 incidences leading us toward the cross that are in all 4 Gospels. And otherwise, they add different things. And that's why I still, and like I said, if I live long enough, your grandchildren will look at me like I've lost my mind. I still think of First Cafeteria. And I've got the tray, and each gospel writer then will select certain aspects from the life. And John says at the very end of his gospel, if all the things are written down, not all the books in the world could contain them. There's just a host of other things. And then you think, here's Matthew and John were eyewitnesses. I think Mark gets much of his material from Peter, but we hypothesize he may be the young man who flees without any clothes on. He's the only one that tells us about that. And then Luke, I talked to eyewitnesses and ministers of the word, and who knows how many others are written, but God saw fit. And Lord willing, in the spring, we're going to come back and just touch on this. A part of it also is that they're written to totally different audiences. Simplistic, but when I think of Matthew, I always think of the Jewish audience. Who would start a book with, this is the genealogy of, unless it was a Jewish audience? Mark is very much for the Romans. Got 19 miracles and immediately and straightway and immediately da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And Peter is in and out of the city of Rome. And even in 1 Peter, he mentions Mark. So there's connections there. Theophilus, a lovely Greek name. And all the people that the Pharisees would not give the time of day to, and especially wouldn't eat with, are going to be the heroes in the book of Luke, and Jesus is going to be the prophet. And then these 3 guys write these, and then John comes along and just says, in the beginning, and just does this majestic thing. And as we said earlier, only 7% of Matthew, Mark, and Luke is in the Gospel of John. And I still just how could you write the same story and tell 93% totally different of the same thing? And that's a part of the majesty of this. Now, we're going to do one other thing. This won't take just a second. And anticipate again, if you're able to come in the spring, this is a part of what we're going to look at. I want us to turn to Colossians chapter 4. And most people think Paul is in prison in Rome. And so when you read the last part of the book of Acts, Luke just says for 2 years, Paul was in his own household under prison arrest. People came and went and all this other stuff. This is where I place Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. And so I think Paul's in prison in Rome, and he's there for that. We know he's minimal there for 2 years. Maybe longer, but we know 2 years for sure. and this is just me, okay? Everyone kind of thinks of things differently. When I read Colossians 4, what comes to my mind is the Gospel Writers Seminar. The Gospel Writers Seminar. Let me show you what I'm talking about. If you look down in verse 10, Paul says, "My fellow prisoner Aristarchus sends you greetings, and so does who? Mark. And who's Mark? Cousin of." Now here's something really significant. I'll spare you any details. I've been in actually 4. I just call them church brawls. I'm in a church where half the family's they're all related, and they don't tell the preacher this, but if you cross grandma, within 6 months, you're history. And the longest for many, many years stayed 3 years before grandma got the rest of the family rallied to, and she wore the pants in the church. Anytime there is a personal friction in a church, you let it go long enough and it starts personal, but one of us is going to make it doctrinal to get the upper hand before it's all said and done. It's not just I have a better idea than I'm either more spiritual or I'm more scriptural than you are. What is the last thing we hear about Paul and Barnabas? The term is, there was such friction, if you have a nice little rock in your shoe, how long do you walk before at some point you just stop and get that thing out of there just to keep that friction from going on? And some people have made interpersonal conflict a lifetime enterprise. At some point, Paul figures out he was wrong and is big enough to embrace and to bring that back together. And it's especially true, it's an occupational hazard for ministers. I've seen 2 ministers get at odds with each other. Don't stone me, but they're worse than grade school girls. You have 2 little grade school boys, and my dad would say, beat the snot out of each other, and then they'll have their arms around each other at the end of the day. Most of the time, 2 little girls don't have their arms around each other at the end of the day. And then they're going to try to divide the whole class and all of their friends and everyone else. And I've just seen some of the pettiest things carried on by adult men, and I just want to shake them and say, would you guys somebody please grow up here, somebody be the adult. And I read this and I think, oh, Mark, the cousin of Barnabas, sends greetings. You've received instructions about him. If he comes, welcome him. Now, I have to turn the page. When you come to verse 14, mine says, our dear friend Luke the doctor. What else do you have? Pardon? Beloved physician. Pardon?
Greets you. Luke, the beloved physician, greets you.
Greets you. Fabulous. Now, just stop for a second. What percentage of the New Testament eventually is present during the house arrest in Rome? Gospel of Mark, Gospel of Luke, Acts, 13 letters of Paul. You see why I now call it the Gospel Writers Seminar? Now, I'm being a little cheeky, my wife would say. I can't imagine that the primary conversation is, are the Blues or the Greens going to win at the chariot races in the Coliseum? Now, if they'd had a star on the side of the helmet, that might have changed. But, I doubt that the primary conversation of these three guys was the chariot races at the Colosseum. What am I saying? Can you imagine what's going on with these three guys?
They're all about the Lord's work.
All about the Lord's work. And here's something for you to look sometime later, and we may touch on it another time. You look in the writings of Paul and see how many things you can find before the cross of Jesus that he describes from the actual life and ministry of Jesus. And I'll tell you, you'll be able to put most of them on one hand. I only wonder, since he has all of this interaction with Mark and with Luke, I cannot imagine the three of them being together and the gospel account not coming up. Had they started writing it? Was it part of the process yet? And so here we are, and this is how the book of Acts closes. All right? Turn to 2 Timothy chapter 4. And here we are, the last letter of Paul. And I have just cried thinking about this. When you come to verse 11, what does he say? Only Luke is with me. Now, we have one son, and our grandfather died in 1992 in his 90s. And for those of us that are grandchildren, he's still the spiritual leader of our family. Just godly and thoughtful and generous, and on it went. And so we named our son Luther after my grandfather. And then I have a fabulous brother named Kent. And if you drop the LU from Luther and the KE from Kent, what do you get? Luke. And a part of what we've talked about is that, matey, will you please be the kind of friend that if you only got one guy with you and you're stuck in prison and you're at the end of the line, could you have anybody better than Luke with you? If you've only got one, could you do any better than having Luke with you?
He's a doctor.
See, he will help take care of. Paul's a walking scar by this point. The stonings, the beatings, the shipwrecks, and everything else. I can't imagine he doesn't have arthritis. And you'll find that he dictates most of his letters. He may not even be able to do, but I mean, and again, I can't go there completely. How big of rocks do you have to kill somebody? You know, you're not just going to have this stoning thing. You know, it's hard for me to go there all the way through. And you read those lists of all the things that he's gone through, and when you look at it, he says in 2 Corinthians, I've been in the open sea 3 days or 3 times. I think the shipwreck in Acts may be number 4. And so he survived all of this stuff, and here he is at the end of the line, and only Luke is with me. But somebody keep reading verse 11.
Get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful to me for the ministry.
Can I say it one more time? I'd like to have one more gospel writer seminar before I go home. And when I talk with younger guys in ministry, be careful about making personal things doctrinal things. Or be careful about breaking fellowship over personal things. You know, for a number of years, my brother Kent and Charlie Powell, we worked together. And because I'm the older, stable brother, not one time what did the older brother and the younger brother gang up on the other guy. Charlie was in the middle, and I was saying, now, Charlie, we really ought to do it this way because of this, this, and this. And then my younger brother said, yeah, but, you know, he's kind of out of touch. He's kind of old. We should really do this, this, and this. And in 8 years of working together, not one time was it the two brothers versus the others. But here's what's important. If you love and trust the other people, if it goes the other way, if you will support it, it will probably work. If you take your bat and ball and go home, My dad would say somebody will take you outside, but we'll stop right there. And here's something very significant. The gospel accounts, and we don't know a whole lot about Matthew. We know John is this one who's right here, but we have accounts of Mark, Luke, and Paul together one time for sure. And then Paul sends the word, get here before winter, before the shipping lines comes down. Hopefully, then John Mark came another time. And just look at can I use the word tapestry? Everybody know what I'm trying to say? That has these just beautiful colors and things that are woven into them. And then look at this wonderful gospel story that is written by these guys. And it has their vocabulary, it has their personality. And I think because of the audience that they're going to, each one is just totally unique, and yet they tell the same story in such a beautiful way. So, Lord willing, we'll come back and touch on that later. I want to turn to the dark wheel. Everybody maybe be there. I just thought this would be a good, it's a simple kind of abbreviated what's on the wheel. And we'll go through this and take a break here in a second. And then when we come back, and we're not going to do much about the discourses, the speeches, the lessons. We're going to talk more about the events. But the first thing that we're going to mention when we do the next handout is 30% of the gospel account is this last week of Jesus' life. And if you just notice, and I'm just looking at the dark wheel is going to be a full page, and then the next page is just completely full of just text. And that's why, here again, is 30% of your gospel account that is within that. You'll see at the very top, there's Friday with a question mark. And this is what I wanted you just to see by way of a parallel. Just doing someone totally independent. He will do the things at Bethany on Saturday, but we're still within a day of each other. And here's what I want you to begin to see is that Jesus has made the trip from Galilee. He's come down, he's done the Perean, the southern Judean ministry, and we'll talk about the details of what takes place. And roughly what we just refer to as the last week is going to be either the Friday and or the Saturday before he's going to be crucified. And so let's do this one, just the sheet first, and then we'll look at some things on the train just to kind of compare, but you can kind of see where they fall together. This is an abbreviation of what the other one is, so I want to just kind of walk through the sheet first, and then we can look at some more detail on the other. Saturday, he arrives at Bethany. The significance of Bethany is that this is the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus. And again, something we'll talk about later. I'm in a class with Leon Morris, and he's actually talking about John. And he said, when you look at the sayings of the cross, John is going to have this wonderful expression, well, Jesus bowed his head and gave up his life. And he said, when you literally translate it, it's like he lay his head on the cross. And then here it came. He said, earlier in the life of Jesus, Jesus said, the foxes of the ground have holes, the birds of the air have nest, the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And he said the final resting place where he could finally lay his head is the cross. With all of the opposition and all of the persecution, wouldn't it be a breath of fresh air to be in the home of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus? My very first job, had gone home. I love the farm, love the animals. And Childress, Texas, on the other side of Altus. And, well, let me just, anybody Lone Star Texans here tonight? Yay, good for you. The elders, a full-blood Indian had come to work with the Baptist youth group, and the Church of Christ kids were doing stuff for the Baptists, so we need to find someone to work with our kids. And so the elders stood up and they said, being from Texas, we have called Lubbock Christian, we've called Abilene Christian, we've called Brown Trail, we've called Preston Road, we've called every school in Texas before we got desperate and called across the Red River to see if there's anybody from Indian Territory who could come and work with us. And they just wanted to give me a fair chance, because if I'd taken the place of some good Texas boy, they never would have accepted me. And so the elder just put everything on the table and said, we've done due diligence and we've checked every Texas school, and so far there's nobody else available. And so we scraped the bottom of the barrel and we've called across, and we have a boy coming from Oklahoma. When I got there, there was no place to stay. There was no room in the inn, none. They had realtors, we made announcements. And so the list went up, and would you keep our youth director for a week at a time? And here's the sign-up list. And here's the trick, Brad. I don't have a car. I've got 3 cardboard boxes. And so if you'll come get my 3 cardboard boxes on Monday, I do have a green bicycle, and give me clear directions on where to go to get to your house, then I'll stay with you for a week. And then if you guys live out in the country, we'll leave my bicycle at the church building, and I'll need a ride back and forth out of town. But please come get my 3 boxes. And so I lived with the church a week at a time. It's amazing what you learn about a church living with them a week at a time. The farm family that had me in, I walk in, and Miss Raydale said, she said, son, you can track mud in my house. You can put your feet on the furniture. You can bring grass burrs in and stick them on the furniture, but when you get through with the dishes, they go in the sink. Am I understood? I didn't know if I was supposed to salute or get down on one. I mean, what a way to welcome someone to your house. You know, I mean, she just went through the riot. You know, this in the museum, you can track mud in, you know, but I'm here to tell you, when you get through with your dishes, I said, yes, ma'am, we'll do that. Being a farm family, we got on like a house on fire. It was just such a great, and I enjoyed the other people, okay? But you can just tell the difference going out and can't help with the cows or other stuff. It was just absolutely amazing. But I had no place to stay. I'm passed around. And they actually signed up for a second week, so I got to stay with them 2 weeks of that summer. That's what I think of when Jesus goes in the house of Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. It's the nearest thing to being home that he has, and he knows that the end is close by. And so when he arrives at Bethany, can I do this? There's just a few hours where wouldn't it be wonderful to be spoiled by Martha? Mary's so busy praying, she probably didn't have time to feed you, but I could, Miss Sheila's up nearly 5:30 every morning doing devotionals and praying and reading stuff, and I turn the alarm off and pray while I'm still warm in bed sometimes, but she's just really, really focused with that. But she also has a huge part of Martha in it. She says, you know, if Mary just helped a little bit, it'd get done a whole lot quicker. But just think about this from personal view. If you're Jesus, would it just be like paradise to be in the home of Mary and Martha and Lazarus? And when we start the last week and we're headed toward the cross, then this is why Bethany is so, well, I think of it as such a blessing. And let me just go ahead and do this. There's all these like little parentheses. The week starts by him being loved and cared for while he's alive in the home of Mary, Martha. And again, do you think Lazarus has any tales to tell? after having been dead for 4 days and being raised from the dead? And if you're one of the sisters and Jesus has raised your brother from the dead and he's back with you, I mean, just look at all these things that are going on. And while he's alive, he's loved and cared for by Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. And then as soon as he dies, it is Joseph of Arimathea and the guy who came to Jesus at night, who's brave enough to come in the daylight and help bury him. And there's just this parentheses of the folks who loved him in breath and in death, that they loved him and they took care of him. And that's what we're going into with this particular part. The crowds are going to come to see Jesus. The triumphal entry we'll touch on a little bit. I still just kind of shake my head. I know I've read the text, but the curse of the fig tree, it's not even in season, you know. I wonder if this is something to do eventually with the destruction of Jerusalem. And we're going to have the cleansing of the temple. I think John is the first one. I think this is a second one. And then this discussion on the Mount of Olives. If you look at the first verses, Matthew 24 and 25, there is probably, and of course it's Mark 13 as well, there is probably more controversy and more diverse opinions in broader Christianity of what goes on in Matthew 24 and 25 than anything that Jesus taught. I look at it very simply. The very first part of it, I think, is the coming of the Romans, and he's going to use the word days, plural, those days, those days, those days, those days, those days, and then all of a sudden he says that day, singular. And I think he starts with the coming of the destruction of Jerusalem, going to be August the 9th of 70 AD, and then that day is going to be the final one, but that's the discussion that goes there. Now, and so we're on Wednesday. Now, let me go ahead and explain this, and then I'll back up and do part 2. This is the way that I look at it. I think Thursday night is the upper room in the Last Supper. Now, do you see my writing there, number 1? They didn't include John 13 through 17, which that's where that goes in terms of the context of the other things that are going on. So when we do the upper room, okay, they're going to talk about the foot washing, but I think we should also put John 13 through 17, you know, passages on love, coming to the Spirit, the oneness, and those other things. So that's number 1. 2, and like I said, I just shook my head. Gethsemane's not here on the print. So number 2, then I went ahead and listed the things that happened in Gethsemane, and again, in all 4 accounts. And then number 3 is the betrayal and the arrest. And then the trial by, and Caiaphas is the high priest, but his memory says father-in-law, is that right? Annas is his father-in-law. And we'll come back and look at those specifically there in a second. So that's going to be Thursday. And the way I keep this in my mind is that if they come with torches, little torches or whatever, this is going to be in the night of Thursday night. The Jewish trial is going to be in the a.m. of the dark of Friday morning. Everybody follow what I tried to say? So the trial is going to be into the dark hours of Friday morning. And here's one of the ways to kind of keep this in mind, and we'll see this in a second. They are at Pilate's door virtually when the sun comes up. And of course, we don't live in this era, but when Leon Morris came up from Melbourne, he said, and I had this experience with a great-grandmother, he said, in talking to my grandparents, they said the biggest single major shift in life was the coming of electricity. If you stayed up and read with a kerosene or coal lamp or something, you could do a few things. But in the ancient world, in antiquity, a lot of people went to bed when the sun went down. And man, if you've gone to bed when the sun goes down, you're ready to get up and get rolling when the sun comes up, because you've got to check it in. In other words, you're not doing what we're doing tonight under lights. And so it's unlawful. The trial should never be held in the dark, which is also just a part of the indictment against the Jewish leaders. But the trial by the Sanhedrin is going to be, if I say the AM hours of Friday, and therefore, we don't even know if Pilate's fully awake or not. And can you imagine somebody saying, in our language we'd say, boss, they're here. There's a whole mob of these crazy Jews that are here. I mean, he hasn't even had breakfast yet. And they're going to get there as quick as they can, because being good Jews, they don't want any bodies left on the cross when dark comes. And they don't want to go into the praetorium, so they will become unclean and can't take the Passover. So even though they're going to kill him, they do have their scruples. There's honor among thieves. And so they're rousing Pilate bright and early to get all of this started. And as we're going to see, it starts with Pilate. He sends him to Herod. And then Jesus won't talk to Herod, and he comes back to Pilate. Then the crucifixion and the burial we'll look at Saturday, and resurrected on Sunday. Now, let me just do one quick comment, and then we'll take a break. If Jesus is in the tomb on Friday, even just for a few hours, and then we have Saturday, and he's raised on Sunday, how many nights is he in the tomb? 2. So some people push everything back a night, and what is listed here is Thursday. Some will do on Wednesday. And again, there's obviously room for discussion on both of these. The person I talked with didn't count any of the day on Wednesday because it was so short. And so if they didn't count, which I would count it, but they didn't. If you don't count Wednesday, and then you have Wednesday night, Thursday, Friday night, Saturday night, raised. So that's how they get the 3 days and 3 nights. But I feel like you should also count part of the day. So let me say it this way. If you do it on Wednesday, and you count part of you either have 4 days and 3 nights, or if you do it this way, you're going to have 3 days and 2 nights. Okay. No sign will be given this generation except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as the prophet Jonah was in the belly of fish for 3 days and 3 nights, so shall the Son of Man be in the heart of the earth. And those are the options that people choose to do one of those two. I tend to think this way, and that's what they did on the train as well in a little more detail. But I like for you to kind of know the options, because if you come along and you see these things happening on Wednesday, then the people who do it on Wednesday typically don't count that few hours, and then they're happier having the fuller time. But I feel like if you count the days, you've either got 4 days and 3 nights, or you've got 3 days and 2 nights. As you can tell, the 12 years we were in Sydney, I got to teach 3 days a week, and our classes would be at least 2.5, sometimes 2 hours and 45 minutes. And it was so much fun because you can do, a lot of times in 30 minutes, you've just gotten into something, and you just got started and the bell rings and you have to stop. And so it's nice to just have some extra time, and so appreciate you being here. These will be some highlights that will be from the wheel on the inside, okay? The last week is the fulfillment of the eternal plan of God. And I want us to look at some of the events, and this is why we're not doing the upper room, we're not doing the discourses, we're not doing the other things, we're doing just primarily the events that lead us up to the cross. And many of you will have this, but for all, and we were having good conversations about whether it was Wednesday or Thursday and the other things, but the writers are very specific about when Jesus gets on the cross and the time frames, and we'll look at that and translate that into our understanding. When I was teaching, we had either whiteboards or chalkboards, and I had a diagram of the Old Testament. Here's Mount Sinai, and here's David, and captivity, and all this stuff. And then I would do a cross, and then put a sun on the other side of it, and then just say, there's a shadow of the cross all across the Old Testament. You will bruise his heel. He will bruise your head. Crush, bruise, yeah. Abraham, through you, all nations of the earth will be blessed. And just as you go all the way through, there is just literally a shadow of the cross all across the Old Testament. And like, for example, in Hebrews 10, the law is the shadow of things to come. And this is what I love about this. Physically, we can only do a shadow by having the reality first. And as soon as we take the reality away, the shadow is gone. Right? Only God could give us the shadow thousands of years ahead of time before the reality of the cross comes. And that's to me just this amazing thing. And so this week that we're looking at is the fulfillment of what God has been doing. And we find in Ephesians, oh, this is the eternal. So when I'm doing little bitty kids, okay, if we're your kids, we'll sing day one, God made. And so here you come here, you be day one. Now, I want somebody on the other side of day one, and this is when God had the plan to send Jesus on the cross. So before God said, let there be light, there was an eternal plan in the mind of God to do what's going to take place on this week. Isn't that amazing?
So he knew we'd be failures.
From the very beginning. Giving us the free will.
Yeah.
Giving us the free will. And knowing that given enough choices we would choose to exercise our own free will, then the plan was there from the very, it's the eternal plan of God to have the events of this week fulfilled. And then the other thing to me is so amazing, and I'm thinking of Judas specifically. God is going to fulfill his plan without violating individual free will of the people involved in it. Judas may have just been a little bit greedy and being at the right place at the right time, allowed to exercise his own free will, and he's the human catalyst to get all of this stuff started, but God didn't zap him and force him to do something that was against his will. 2, in different ways, Jesus repeatedly predicted his going to Jerusalem to be killed. This is my favorite sample. And again, we keep doing these parentheses type things. Here is in the heart of Mark, the middle of Mark. And if you look, this is how I remember it. 8:30, 9:30, and 10:30. Okay? It's like we come home, we get ready to go, I'm going to go to bed on Paul, but it's 8:30, 9:30, and 10:30. 3 times Jesus very specifically says, look guys, we're going to go to Jerusalem, I'm going to be betrayed, handed over to men, I'm going to be killed, and on the 3rd day raised again, and they miss it every time. But notice, see the first asterisk? There is a healing of a blind man in 8:22, and right after the 3rd time they don't understand in 10:30, 10:46 is blind Bartimaeus. Okay, watch my hands. Preceding and after the 3 predictions are miracles of giving sight to the blind. And as our Greek teacher said, Mark is wanting you to think who is actually blind in this passage. The blind man see, and the apostles are blind as a bat to what is about to happen. And this is one of these literary things that Mark loves to do, and he puts these parentheses reading around the events that take place. In the book of Luke, Jesus sets his face toward Jerusalem. And this is going to be the catalyst headed toward the cross. And look how early, 9:51. And it's just like he puts blinkers on and everything else is put on hold. We're going to go to Jerusalem. Then you'll see 13 and 18 other passages with that. In the book of John, there's this continued discussion, oh, my time or my hour has not yet come. Woman, what do you have to do with me? My time has not yet come. And my mother was just exactly like this. She didn't pay a bit of attention to it. Several years ago, my mom called me on Thursday. She said, are you doing anything on Tuesday? And I thought, well, I wouldn't before this phone call, but something tells me that I will have something. And so my dad's youngest cousin, she lived in Lawton. Her husband had died. They didn't go to church. They didn't have a preacher, so they were just going to cremate him. And my mom says, well, you've got to have a service. And Vicki said, well, we don't have a preacher. My mom said, give me just a second. And so I get this phone call. He is not a Christian. He's a doctor. He has read through 2 encyclopedias just to find out what's in them. He loves to play golf. He starts the golf course down by South Padre Island, so he gets his pilot's license to fly on the weekend to go play golf at South Padre. He makes house calls. He has about 60 people that he makes house calls after work. And so here I am doing this funeral. Every part of Lawton is here, okay? Here's the bankers, the businessmen, the builders, the school teachers, on and on. Sorry. These are the working girls, and I can't look at them because I don't want to see what color underwear they're wearing. And as a doctor, he keeps them working. And so every part of society of Lawton is here. And 13 people told his wife, this man was the best friend I had in the world. He was a great humanitarian, but he wasn't saved. But when my mother calls and says, are you doing anything on Tuesday? I hear Jesus saying, woman, my hour's not yet come. And she doesn't pay a bit of attention. Y'all just fill up those jars and do whatever he tells you to do. And that's where the miracles start in the Gospel of John. And mom just kind of nudges things along. But Jesus keeps saying the hour's not yet come. And then all of a sudden, the hour's here. And just like with Luke, we set our face toward Jerusalem. And so each of the Gospel accounts has this anticipation and this building toward this final event that's going to take place, but they each do it very, very uniquely. John 10, 17 and 18, fabulous passage. For this reason the Father loves me. I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me. I lay it down on my own accord. I have the authority to lay it down, and I have the authority to take it up again. And the Gospel of John is going to give us the crucifixion of the Lamb of God. Because what does John the Baptist say in chapter 1? Behold, the Lamb of God who lays down his life for the sins of the world. And after talking about being the gate and the good shepherd, then Jesus says, I am going to lay down my life. There's just no if and ands about it. He knows exactly what's going to happen. And so when I read with non-Christians, and I always want to read an account of the crucifixion, and I especially love it if they can read it on their own several weeks ahead of time. John is going to give us the crucifixion of the Lamb of God. I lay down my life. And when it comes to the end, he says, it is finished. And the expression we used, he bows his head, and what does he do? He gave up his spirit. They didn't take it from him. And when it was time, Jesus died and laid down his life. And that's how John gets us to the cross. I love this expression in number 3 at the top. The Gospels are the story of the crucifixion with a different introduction. And again, the life of Jesus is 30%. And just reading this week, the writer said, we use the word crucial. This is crucial. The stem of the original word for crucial is crucifixion. This is crucial that you get this done today, secular world. This is really important. The actual word, the stem of the word originally, the crucifixion was something that God and Jesus chose and had to be done in that sense. The kingship of Jesus, 3 and 3. He enters Jerusalem, and we're going to see the words here. Blessed is the king who enters Jerusalem. And so the triumphal entry, and again, you're doing this parenthesis type thing, is the opening. And then what do they nail to the cross? The King of the Jews. And see how the kingship feature is stressed all along. I love this one in 3:4. Old Testament Samuel, prophet, dignified. He anoints, and that's if you did this in the Old Testament with me. 1 Samuel, he anoints Saul. He anoints the second king in 2 Samuel. He anoints David. Who anoints Jesus? Women. Luke 7, if he knew what manner of woman this was, he would not let her touch him, is what they're saying. And then Mary is going to anoint him just before the crucifixion. And so Messiah, the word Jesus, save, you will call his name Jesus, he will save his people from their sins. Christ, Christos, is a derivative of the word Messiah, or the one who is anointed. And the prophet, the first two kings, are anointed appropriately by Samuel. And of all things, Jesus is anointed by two women who live on opposite sides of the street. And yet they're a part of the anointing of the Messiah, which to me is always just amazing. So why was he crucified? And again, I'm following our dates that are here. Like I said, when you get later in the week, there's different ones. Sunday, he enters Jerusalem and he goes back to Bethany. And again, I read this and I kind of go, wouldn't that be wonderful? You know, Kim, I'm not trying to be silly, but you just think about this. If Jesus is staying at your house, you're going to fix the very best meals you know how. I mean, that's just the nature of it. And for both all of the criticism, opposition, and what is about to happen, just the human side of me says, oh, wasn't it wonderful that he was so deeply loved and cared for in some ways just in those preceding days, just before the tragedy of the cross. So that's why this Bethany connection is so important, and being able to be in the home of Martha, you know, Mary and Lazarus. And I doubt that they told him he had to take his dishes to the sink. So 1:1, our triumphal entry. All the religious leaders are put on edge. I put Mark in the middle. Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord, the coming of the kingdom of David. Hosanna in the highest. So these people are shouting Hosanna, and they're pulling off palm branches and throwing down garments. And just imagine how the Pharisees are doing. They're just fit to be tied. And so the precipitation and the building of the crucifixion is all taking place. 1:1-2, we notice he curses the fig tree. And then 1:1-3 is very important, and Matthew, Mark, and Luke give us mostly the same thing. There is a final showdown, a final confrontation. And this is going to be true in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John will do something totally different. So here's number one. And when I read this, I just think, who do you think you are? By what authority are you doing these things? Oh, well, let me ask you a question. John the Baptist, was he from heaven or from men? And so the whole final brawl starts with, who gave you the authority to do this? Jesus pours gas on the fire and tells the parable of the tenants, and they realize that's for us. They didn't miss that one. And they perceived that he had told, well, they were seeking to arrest him, but they feared the people, for they perceived that he had told the parable against them. They got it. Then there are three questions, and Matthew and Mark are the same. Luke has one difference. Shall we pay taxes to Caesar? Religious leaders, Sadducees, oh, who will be her husband in the resurrection? Ladies, I'm sorry. If she's had 6 husbands and I'm number 7, I would at least like to have a cooking examination of the ingredients in the food. Because if 6 husbands have bitten the dust, then something is going on. The Sadducees, who don't believe in the resurrection, asking this question. And then, what is the greatest commandment? And notice this comment from Mark. After that, no one dared ask him any more questions. So this is leading up to that final, we have no options, we've got to kill him. And then Mark will tell us he taught in the temple And how can the scribes say that the Christ is the son of David? And read along, because I inserted two things. David said in the Holy Scriptures, the Lord, which is going to be God, said to my Lord, which is Jesus, sit at my right hand until I put your enemies under your feet. David calls him Lord, so how can he be his son? After this, there are no more attempts to trap him. The term the die is cast, and their only option left is to kill him. And so Matthew, Mark, and Luke give us that final confrontation through especially those questions and the responses, and after that, their patience has run out. Now, when you turn the page in John, none of those events are in John. The crucifixion in John is because of the raising of Lazarus. How can we let a 4-day-old dead man be running around, and they're going to make plans both to kill Jesus and, of all things, to kill Lazarus? And so that which precipitated the crucifixion in John is actually going to be the raising of Lazarus. And look at the bold, from that time on, they made plans to put him to death, and they gave orders, if anyone knew where he was, let them know so they could arrest him. So, here's the final events. Every Passover, there are thousands of Jews come to Jerusalem. And you don't have cell phones, and you don't even have little flashlights. With torches, how are you going to, with thousands of people camping out and laying around, how are you ever going to find him at night? And that's where then Judas is the key. Because they could never find him on their own. When we were at the farm, we would catch a whole bunch of fireflies and put them in a gallon mustard jar, and they would just kind of light up, you know, like a light within the whole thing as the lights would come on. And I just see these guys coming towards me like this huge glowworm coming out of Jerusalem. And unless you wanted to be caught, you can easily get away because they're so obvious in the dark. But without Judas, they would never have started all of those things. And then here is God fulfilling the eternal plan again without violating human free will. Absolutely amazing. So how do we arrest him without causing a riot? Well, they're looking by stealth to kill him, but not during the feast. Here's 2:2. Judas provided the solution to the dilemma, and Judas is then looking for an opportunity to betray him. When you look at the trial, some people will only have 2 on the first one. They'll just have Annas and Caiaphas. I do 3, but let me explain why. Mark just says, initially, they take Jesus to the high priest's house. Okay, who's the high priest? Caiaphas. And his father-in-law is also kind of honorary high priest, retired high priest type thing. However that works out, there's either 2, may possibly, and I did 3 on this one. If they went to the house of the high priest, then they're going to go to Annas for a while, and then they're going to come back to Caiaphas. And all I want you to see is that from the night arrest until the sun comes up, then this is what I call the Jewish trial. And these are the people involved. The Sanhedrin's there and all these other people. Peter's denial and all that stuff takes place. As soon as the sun comes up, they want the civil trial on because they want to get him killed and be able to get him off the cross before the sun goes down. And this may be their one chance. And they know the signs and miracles that he's done, and Judas gives them that opportunity. And they're just thinking, we've worked and worked and worked for this. And so it starts with Pilate. Pilate finds out he's from Galilee, so Herod's in town. Sends him to Herod. Jesus won't come. He comes in front of Herod, is mute. And then Herod sends him back. And how interesting. On that day, Pilate and Herod became friends. They formerly had been at enmity with each other. And I think Jesus brings all kinds of people together. He's going to bring the Sanhedrin together. The Sadducees, the Pharisees, and the Herodians are going to be brought together against him. And then after the resurrection, then he's going to bring together the people who are Christians. In Luke, and we won't go into details here, and being Dr. Luke is going to give 3 charges. Luke is also going to give 3 attempts to let Jesus go. Lord willing, this will be our discussion on the Lord's Supper on Sunday. Do you know the term Simon, Bar, Jonah? Jesus is going to talk about. Bar is the word son of. When you look at the word Barabbas, Bar, Abba. The word Barabbas means the son of the Father. Now think about this. You're in prison because of insurrection. You're probably a thief and a murderer. And first of all, you hear this chant, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. And you're sitting there, and then a little bit later you hear, give us Barabbas, give us Barabbas. If you're in a jail cell and your name is Barabbas and all you've heard is crucify him, and give us Barabbas, what do you think is about to happen? And then somebody comes and takes the key and unlocks the door, and the son of the earthly father goes free, and the son of the heavenly Father is about to be killed. Never get over the amazement of that. So finally, here's the crucifixion. As we said, they're at Pilate's door at daybreak. It's unlawful, but they've done this all through the night. And then the reason I put the cross here, you probably got this figured out, but this is helpful to me. If you think of a sundial, okay, the 6th hour is going to be noon. So therefore, and you know, when I was younger, this didn't make any sense to me. Okay, they're going to do the trial, Pilate, take him out, all the mockery and the crucifixion. Our Lord is going to be on the cross by 9 o'clock. Okay? So the 3rd hour, if you start 0 on the sundial and come up to there, that's 3rd hour. And then the 6th hour is going to be noon. And so there's going to be darkness over the whole land from noon. And then he's going to die on the cross at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which is the 9th hour. And I mentioned to someone earlier, I never wore a watch till we went to college because other than Wednesday night church, we didn't need one. And my grandfather said, you know, if you're out in the field and between looking up and your empty stomach, you can't tell when lunch is, you just deserve to go hungry. And so we just got between here and here, we didn't, what do we need to watch for? And other than getting off early enough to go to church, because sometimes the dad, we'd start at 4 o'clock on Sunday morning. He said, son, we're going to get up and get in a half day, and then we'll have a Sabbath day's rest between 10 and 12. And so we would get up and work and come in at 9:15, wash our hands, change clothes, take an Old Spice shower, put on our church clothes, get something, a little nibble. We'd had something earlier to eat and get to church and Bible class, and we smelled fresh as daisies. And then we could have a Sabbath rest from 10 until 12. And then if he was going to go adjust hair losses, then we would work until youth class at 5 o'clock. So we could still get 8 to 10 hours in on Sunday and be at church 3 times. But what do you need to watch for? And so in a society, we don't have Timex, we don't have Rolex. That's how they're going to do the time, and the riders are very consistent. But this is a part of just this unspeakable agony between all the beatings, all the stuff that's taken place. Then if you can have the sundial in your mind, and then have him on the cross by 9 o'clock, darkness comes from noon. And as I said on Sunday, I still just shake down the chills. The creator of light, all things are made through him, the light of the world, dies in 3 hours of darkness. And it was so wrong, but that's the part of the price of our ransom. So here's final things. After his death, his side is pierced with a Roman sword, or it's probably spear, sorry. One of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and at once there came out blood and water. Joseph obtains permission to bury Jesus, and he's helped by Nicodemus. And let me just throw this in real quick. I'm in just a regular Bible class, and our teacher says, sometime if you're teaching a class, you'll make all this preparation, and who knows, it might be a snowstorm, it might be a retreat or something, and you might only have 1 or 2 people come to class. And he says the temptation is going to go, okay, I prepared for fill in the blank, 10 or 12, and only 1 or 2. And then he just stopped and he said, how many people were present when Jesus says, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son? Who's there? Nicodemus.
And probably John.
But it's not the Sermon on the Mount.
No, it's
God is a spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit and truth, for such the Father seeks to worship him. Who's there? The Samaritan woman. And he said, if you're a Bible class teacher and only 1 person shows up, turn it on, because this might be a Nicodemus moment for that person. And that's always stood out to me. My granddad said, we'd go out and feed the cattle, especially in ice and snow. And he said, if only half of them show up, feed them really well so they'll want to come back the next time. You don't have to give them all of them, just feed the ones who come and feed them really well. And that's how we should do with our teaching. And when you look at this, Joseph is brave enough to go in public to ask for the body, and the guy who previously was embarrassed and came to Jesus at night is his co-worker in getting him down from the cross, getting him into the tomb, and getting him buried. And so here, with breath, Mary, Martha, and Lazarus; with death, Joseph and Nicodemus; then godly people take care of our Lord both in life and in death. And I love this expression in Matthew. Pilate, when that impostor was alive, he said, I will be raised from the dead. The apostles never understood this, but his enemies did. And the current stance of Judaism toward Jesus is, oh, he was a Jew, but he's an impostor. While that impostor was alive, he said, and then Pilate says, well, you go make the tomb as secure as you can, and I laugh at it every time I read that. You put him in Fort Knox, you do whatever you want to, and what's going to happen on the first day of the week? He's coming out. And this is kind of where the events end before we head then into the events leading toward the crucifixion. And we don't want the apostles to be able to steal his body. If you hear Sunday night, we had that wonderful song, Be Ye Glad. And the description of the death of Jesus, the heart and the soul of a nation lay wounded and dead as a corpse. And I oftentimes think, boy, if you're Peter, James, and John, how depressed are you from Friday night until Sunday? But you have to be careful. You can't believe what women say. They're probably just hysterical women. So you're going to need to run to the tomb and find out for yourselves. And Lord willing, we'll sing that for next week.